The Lunar Deep Space Observatory wasn't supposed to make history that day. Dr. Kira Patel had been tracking what she thought was a new asteroid when the object suddenly changed course. Within hours, every major space agency on Earth was analyzing the data, and within days, humanity had its first confirmed contact with an alien civilization, though not in the way anyone had expected. The massive structure that emerged from the darkness of space was clearly damaged. Even to untrained eyes, the gashes along its hull told a story of catastrophic failure. Commander James Sullivan stood at the viewport of the ISS-2, watching as the alien station drifted into Earth's orbit, its size dwarfing anything humanity had ever built in space. "Their main reactor is going critical," reported Lieutenant Raj Sharma, his eyes fixed on the readings. Whatever hit them, it wasn't just external damage. Their whole system is failing. The first transmission they received was not the grand message of peace and unity that humanity had dreamed of. Instead, it was a desperate plea for help, broadcast on frequencies that human engineers had only theorized about. The translation took precious hours, but the message was clear. 12,000 souls aboard the Viridian station faced imminent death if their life support systems failed. The world's governments mobilized with unprecedented speed. Within 48 hours, every major space agency had contributed to a joint rescue mission. The problem wasn't getting to the station. It was figuring out how to save its occupants once they got there. Their atmospheric requirements are completely different from ours, Dr. Nikolai Volkov explained during the emergency summit in Geneva. The Viridians breathe a mixture of gases that would be toxic to humans. Their gravity requirements are less than a third of Earth's. We can't simply bring them down to Earth or transfer them to our space stations. The Viridian ambassador, a tall, ethereal being named Thilavos, stood before the United Nations Security Council, her translucent skin shimmering under the harsh lights. "Our children will die first," she said, her words translated through the hastily constructed interface. "Their bodies cannot withstand the failing life support systems as long as adults. We have perhaps 72 hours before we lose the first of them." Commander Sullivan led the first team aboard the alien station. The sight that greeted them was both beautiful and heartbreaking. The Viridians had built their home in space with an aesthetic that merged function and art. Sweeping corridors that spiral upward, walls that seem to pulse with living light, and everywhere, the signs of a civilization fighting for survival. "Their engineering is incredible," Lieutenant Jessica Wong reported back to Earth, her voice filled with awe. "But their power distribution system is completely different from anything we've ever seen. We can't simply plug in our generators. It would be like trying to power a quantum computer with a potato battery." The initial assessment was grim. The station's main reactor had been damaged by what the Viridians called a space anomaly, a phenomenon they had been studying when everything went wrong. The backup systems were failing one by one, and the station's own engineers had exhausted their supplies trying to repair the damage. Back on Earth, Dr. Patel worked with a team of international scientists to understand the Viridian technology. "Their entire approach to physics is different," she explained to the Emergency Response Committee. "They don't just use different tools. They see the fundamental forces of the universe through a different lens. We're not just dealing with a language barrier. We're dealing with a completely different way of thinking about reality itself." Time was running out. The station's life support systems were failing faster than predicted, and the first signs of serious distress were appearing among the Viridian children. The human rescue teams watched helplessly as alien parents tried to comfort their suffering offspring, the scene transcending species boundaries in its raw emotion. Commander Sullivan stood in the station's central control room, watching as human and Viridian engineers worked side by side, racing against time. The challenge seemed impossible. They needed to find a way to power a station built on principles they barely understood, maintain an atmosphere they couldn't breathe, and preserve gravity conditions that would crush the station's inhabitants if they got it wrong. "We have to think differently," he announced to the combined teams. "We can't solve this by forcing our technology to work with theirs. We need to understand how they think, how they see the universe, and we need to do it fast. As the first day of rescue operations drew to a close, Dr. Patel made a breakthrough. Studying the Viridian children's reaction to the failing systems, she noticed something extraordinary. Their bodies aren't just responding to the changes. They're trying to adapt to them. The Viridians evolved in space. Their entire biology is built around adapting to changing conditions. We've been thinking about this all wrong. The revelation sparked a new approach. Instead of trying to force human solutions onto Viridian problems, the rescue teams began to look at how the station itself was trying to adapt to the damage. The living light in the walls wasn't just decoration. It was part of a vast biological computer, constantly adjusting and evolving. As Part 1 drew to a close, humanity faced its greatest challenge yet. They had 72 hours to save thousands of lives. But first, they had to learn to think like beings who had evolved among the stars. The impossible task of adapting human technology to save an alien civilization was about to test the limits of human ingenuity, and failure meant watching thousands of children die while their parents looked to Earth's people for salvation. The station's lights pulsed weakly as another system failed, and in the central control room, Commander Sullivan watched as his team prepared for the longest night of their lives. They had made first contact, but unless they could perform a miracle, it might also be humanity's last contact with the Viridians. The second day of the rescue operation began with a startling discovery. Dr. Patel's team, working through the night, had found that the Viridian station's walls weren't just conducting energy. They were storing it, much like a plant stores sunlight. It's not just a space station, Dr. Patel explained during the emergency briefing. It's alive. The whole structure is a single, massive organism that the Viridians have symbiotically bonded with. When we tried to power it with our generators, it rejected them like an immune system rejecting foreign tissue. The revelation changed everything. The human rescue teams had been trying to repair mechanical systems that didn't exist. Instead, they needed to heal a wounded creature larger than any that had ever existed on Earth. Lieutenant Sharma, who had been studying the station's power distribution network, suddenly understood why their initial attempts had failed. "We've been thinking about this like engineers fixing a machine," he said. "We need to start thinking like doctors treating a patient." The Viridian chief scientist, Zeraven, confirmed their findings. "Our ancestors did not build the stations," she explained through the translator. "They found them, dormant and drifting between stars. Over generations, we learned to wake them, to bond with them. This station, which we call Luminara, has been our home for 1,000 years." The news sent shockwaves through the human scientific community. Dr. Marcus Rivera, a leading xenobiologist, arrived from Earth with a team of medical specialists. "If we're going to save these people," he announced, "we need to save their home first. And to do that, we need to understand how it thinks." The challenge was unprecedented. Human medical knowledge was based entirely on Earth-evolved life forms. The station organism, which they now called Luminara, operated on principles that seemed to defy the basic laws of biology. It could convert raw energy directly into matter, store memories in crystalline structures, and manipulate gravity through processes that human science couldn't explain. Commander Sullivan watched as Dr. Rivera's team set up their equipment in what they thought was Luminara's equivalent of a central nervous system. The walls here pulsed with stronger light, and strange crystalline formations grew in patterns that reminded him of neural networks. "The Viridian children," Dr. Rivera observed, "they're not just suffering from the failing life support. They're feeling Luminara's pain. The connection between them and the station is far deeper than we initially thought." Working alongside the human medical team, Zeraven revealed more about their symbiotic relationship with Luminara. "Our children are born connected to the station. They learn to communicate with it before they learn to speak with each other. When Luminara hurts, they hurt. When she dies." The implications were clear. If they couldn't save the station, they wouldn't just be losing a structure. They would be witnessing the death of an ancient being, and potentially traumatizing an entire generation of Viridian children. Lieutenant Wong made a breakthrough while studying the station's crystalline memory structures. "These aren't just data storage," she reported excitedly. "They're more like stem cells. They can differentiate into different types of tissue depending on what the station needs, if we can figure out how to trigger the right response." The human medical team worked frantically to adapt their understanding of biological systems to Luminara's alien physiology. They discovered that the station's wounds weren't just physical damage. The space anomaly had disrupted the very processes that allowed it to maintain its complex biological systems. Dr. Rivera compared it to an autoimmune disorder. Luminara is trying to heal itself, but it's attacking its own systems in the process. We need to find a way to reset its immune response without shutting down the vital functions keeping everyone alive. The Viridian engineers, initially skeptical of the human medical approach, began to share their own knowledge of Luminara's biological systems. They had generations of experience living with the station, but had never thought to approach its maintenance from a medical perspective. As the second day drew to a close, the combined human-Viridian team had developed a radical theory. If they could use the station's own crystalline structures to generate new tissue, they might be able to bypass the damaged sections entirely. But the process would require an enormous amount of energy they didn't have. Commander Sullivan stood in Luminara's neural center, watching the pulses of light grow steadily weaker. They had made incredible progress in understanding the station's true nature, but they were running out of time. The Viridian children were growing weaker, and the station's vital signs were failing. "We need to think bigger," he announced to the exhausted teams. "If Luminara is alive, then it must have evolved to survive in space. There must be a way it can heal itself using the resources available out here. We're not just looking for a power source. We're looking for food." As they prepared for their third day of rescue operations, the combined teams faced a new challenge. They needed to find a way to feed a creature the size of a city, using only what they could find in the void of space. The impossible task had just become even more daunting, but with the lives of thousands hanging in the balance, failure was not an option. The lights pulsed once more, weaker than ever, as if Luminara itself was trying to help them find the answer before it was too late. The third day brought new tensions as exhaustion and cultural differences began taking their toll. The first major clash came when Dr. Rivera's team proposed using modified stem cells from Earth organisms to help regenerate Luminara's damaged tissues. "Absolutely not," declared Elder Killeran, the Viridian's chief cultural guardian. His translucent form trembled with barely contained anger. "You cannot contaminate Luminara with foreign biological material. The station has maintained its purity for millennia." Commander Sullivan watched the argument escalate, noting how the lights in the walls flickered more intensely, as if Luminara itself was reacting to the conflict. "The station's degrading faster than we predicted," Lieutenant Sharma reported quietly. "We have maybe 18 hours before critical systems begin to fail completely." The situation grew more complex when several human crew members began showing signs of spatial disorientation. The station's varying gravity fields, combined with the alien atmosphere in some sections, were taking a physical toll on the rescue teams. "We can't keep rotating crews at this rate," Dr. Pidal argued during the emergency meeting. "Every time we switch teams, we lose precious hours bringing new people up to speed. We need a permanent solution for our people to work here." But it wasn't just the humans who were struggling. The Viridian children's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Dr. Rivera discovered that their biological connection to Luminara made them particularly vulnerable to the station's failing systems. "It's like they're experiencing organ failure," he explained, frustration evident in his voice. "Their bodies are trying to compensate for Luminara's damaged systems, but it's draining their own life force." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Wong, who had been studying the station's crystalline memory structures, noticed something peculiar in the children's quarter. "The crystals here are different," she reported. "They're not just storing memory, they're actively trying to adapt to human presence." Dr. Rivera, and Zeraven investigated the phenomenon together, setting aside their earlier disagreements in the face of this new discovery. They found that the youngest Viridian children, those born on the station, had developed a slightly different connection to Luminara, one that was more adaptable to change. But as they worked to understand this new development, a more immediate crisis emerged. One of the station's primary gravity generators failed, sending a section of Luminara into chaos. Emergency barriers activated, trapping both human and Viridian crews in affected areas. The station's trying to protect itself, Zaravan realized, watching as the living walls pulsed with erratic patterns. But its defensive responses are making things worse. It's like a fever that's grown too high. Commander Sullivan led the rescue effort personally, working with Viridian engineers to reach the trapped crews. In the process, they discovered something that changed their entire understanding of the crisis. "Look at these readings," Lieutenant Sharma called out, pointing to his displays. "The station's not just damage. It's preparing for something. These energy patterns, they're similar to what we see in chrysalides on Earth." The revelation sparked intense debate among both human and Viridian scientists. Could Luminara be attempting some form of metamorphosis? The theory explained many of the strange readings they'd been seeing, but it also presented a terrifying possibility. If the station is trying to transform, Dr. Paddle explained to a grim-faced emergency council, then our attempts to repair it might actually be preventing its natural healing process. But if we're wrong, and we let it proceed, the stakes were clear. If they interfered with a natural process, they might doom the station and its inhabitants. But if they stood back and their theory was wrong, thousands would die while they watched helplessly. A new division emerged between the teams. The Viridian traditionalists, led by Elder Caloran, demanded they continue trying to repair the station using conventional methods. The progressives, including Zeraven, supported the metamorphosis theory and wanted to help the process along. The human teams were equally split. Dr. Rivera's medical perspective supported allowing the station's natural processes to proceed, while many engineers feared the risks were too high. As tension mounted, Commander Sullivan noticed something everyone else had missed. The Viridian children in the crystal chamber were trying to communicate, not with their parents or the rescue teams, but with Luminara itself. They're not just connected to the station, he realized. They're part of its evolution. Whatever Luminara is trying to become, these children are meant to be part of the process. But time was running out. The station's deterioration was accelerating, and they had to make a decision: continue with their increasingly desperate repair efforts, or trust in an alien process they barely understood. The lights in the neural center flashed urgently, and new crystals began forming along the walls. Whatever was going to happen would happen soon, whether they were ready or not. Commander Sullivan gathered the team leaders for what might be their final decision. "We've spent 3 days trying to impose our understanding on Luminara," he said, looking at each face in turn. "Maybe it's time we let Luminara show us what it needs." As the third day drew to a close, they'd prepared to take their greatest risk yet. They would either witness a miracle of alien evolution or preside over one of the greatest tragedies in human history. The choice was made. Now they could only watch, wait, and hope they hadn't just doomed 12,000 souls to death in the cold void of space. The decision to trust in Luminara's natural processes was immediately met with both dramatic and terrifying consequences. Within hours of withdrawing their repair efforts, entire sections of the station began to crystallize. "It's like watching ice form on a pond," Lieutenant Wong observed, her instruments tracking the spread of the crystalline structures. "But these formations are alive. They're growing according to some pattern we can't yet see." Dr. Rivera and his medical team worked frantically to monitor the Viridian children, who had fallen into a state that resembled suspended animation. Their biological readings were unlike anything previously recorded, showing signs of both extreme stress and unprecedented cellular regeneration. "They're not dying," he reported with cautious optimism. "They're changing. Their bodies are synchronized with whatever process Luminara is undergoing. Commander Sullivan ordered all non-essential personnel to evacuate to a safe distance, but he and a core team remained aboard to monitor the transformation. The risk was enormous, but they couldn't abandon the Viridians in their hour of greatest need. The breakthrough came from Dr. Patel, who had been analyzing data from the original space anomaly that had damaged the station. "It wasn't an accident," she announced, her voice trembling with excitement. "Luminara deliberately intercepted that energy wave. It needed it, like a catalyst." Zeraven confirmed this revelation with ancient Viridian records that had been previously untranslated. "Our oldest stories speak of the Great Transformation, a time when our ancestor stations would remake themselves to adapt to new challenges. But such events were considered myths. The crystallization process accelerated, and with it came new challenges. The remaining human crew had to constantly relocate to stay ahead of the spreading changes. The station's internal layout was literally rebuilding itself around them. The crystal structures aren't random," Lieutenant Sharma discovered, comparing readings from different sections. "They're forming new neural pathways, like a brain rewiring itself. Luminara isn't just repairing damage, it's evolving." The most dramatic moment came when the station's outer hull began to change. The crystalline growth spread across the surface like frost, but instead of becoming more fragile, the hull was growing stronger. Spectral analysis showed that the new material was capable of absorbing and processing various forms of space radiation, exactly what the station needed to prevent future damage. Working with Viridian scientists, Dr. Rivera made another crucial discovery. The children in suspended animation weren't just passengers in this process. They were essential to it. Their neural patterns were helping to guide Luminara's transformation, their young minds more adaptable to change than their elders. "It's a perfect symbiosis," he explained. "The children provide the flexibility needed for evolution, while Luminara provides the strength and stability needed to survive in space. They're literally growing together." Commander Sullivan and his team faced their greatest challenge when the station's core began to transform. The power fluctuations threatened to tear Luminara apart, but attempting to stabilize them might interrupt the delicate metamorphosis. "Trust the process," Zeraven urged as they watched the core's energy readings spike to dangerous levels. "Our children trust it. We must do the same." The gamble paid off. The core's crystal structure realigned itself, creating a new type of power distribution system that was more efficient than anything either humans or Viridians had designed. The station's energy crisis wasn't just being solved, it was being transcended. As the transformation neared its completion, the suspended Viridian children began to awaken. They were changed. Their translucent skin now had patterns that matched Luminara's new crystalline structures, and their ability to communicate with the station was stronger than ever. The first child to wake fully was a young girl named Lyra Vess. Her first words, translated for the human crew, captured the magnitude of what they had witnessed. "Luminara is not just our home now. She is our teacher. She shows us how to grow beyond what we thought possible." The station's transformation had taken less than 24 hours, but its implications would be studied for generations. The new Luminara was more than just a space station. It was a living testament to the power of trust, adaptation, and the courage to embrace change. Commander Sullivan stood with Dr. Patel and the others in the transformed Neural Center, watching as human and Viridian scientists worked together to understand what they had witnessed. The walls pulsed with a stronger, steadier light than ever before, and the air itself seemed charged with possibility. "We didn't save them," he realized, looking at the changed faces of the Viridian children. "We just helped them save themselves." Sometimes the most impossible things become possible when we learn to let go of our need to control them. As the fourth day dawned, Luminara shone like a newborn star in Earth's orbit, its crystalline surface refracting sunlight in ways that made it visible even from the ground. Humanity had not just made first contact or saved an alien civilization. They had witnessed and assisted in the birth of something entirely new in the history of both species. The impossible had been made real, not through force or brilliant engineering, but through trust, adaptation, and the courage to embrace the unknown. As human and Viridian crews celebrated their success, they knew that this was just the beginning of a much greater journey of discovery. 1 year after Luminara's transformation, Earth's scientific community was still grappling with its implications. The station had become a joint human-Viridian research center, where scientists from both species worked to understand the miracle they had witnessed. Dr. Paddle stood at her new workspace in Luminara's Chronobiology lab, surrounded by equipment that merged human and Viridian technology. The station didn't just evolve physically, she explained to a group of new researchers. It created an entirely new way for different species to interact with space itself. The most profound changes were seen in the Viridian children who had been part of the transformation. They had developed abilities that their parents' generation could barely comprehend. A deeper connection to Luminara that allowed them to understand and manipulate the station's systems in ways that seemed almost magical. Commander Sullivan, now serving as Earth's primary liaison to Luminara, had witnessed these changes firsthand. They don't just live in space anymore, he noted in his regular reports. They're learning to speak its language. The station's new crystalline structure had proven to be more than just a defensive adaptation. It was a new form of technology that could process and store energy with unprecedented efficiency. Human engineers working with Viridian experts had already begun developing applications that could revolutionize space travel. The crystals don't just store energy, Lieutenant Wong explained during a presentation to the International Space Coalition. They remember it. Every form of radiation, every gravitational wave. It's all recorded and processed in ways we're only beginning to understand. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. The crisis had forced both species to confront their prejudices and limitations. The Viridian traditionalists, led by Elder Kelleran, had been humbled by the realization that their ancient knowledge was incomplete. The humans had learned that sometimes the best solution was to step back and trust in processes they couldn't control. Zeraven, now leading the Joint Research Initiative, summed it up best. We thought we were masters of space travel, but we were really just children playing with tools we didn't understand. Now, through Luminara, we're all learning together. The station had become more than a symbol of cooperation. It was a living laboratory where the boundaries between biology and technology, between species and space itself, were constantly being redefined. The crystalline structures continued to grow and adapt, creating new possibilities faster than either species could study them. Dr. Rivera's medical team had documented extraordinary developments in human crews who spent extended periods aboard Luminara. The station's changing us too, he reported. Not as dramatically as the Viridians, but there are subtle adaptations occurring. It's like Luminara is teaching our bodies how to better survive in space. The transformed children, led by Lyra Vess, had become bridges between the species. Their unique perspective helped both humans and adult Viridians understand concepts that had previously seemed impossible. They spoke of space not as a void to be conquered, but as a living system to be understood and embraced. The old stories weren't myths, Lyra Vess explained to a gathering of scientists. They were prophecies. Our ancestors knew that someday we would need to evolve beyond our original forms. They built the capacity for change into Luminara's very structure, waiting for the right moment and the right allies. Commander Sullivan found himself reflecting on this as he watched Earth rise over Luminara's crystalline horizon. The station's transformation had sparked a renaissance in space exploration and research. Other stations were being built using principles learned from Luminara, though none could replicate its living core. We came to space thinking we needed to overcome it, he wrote in his personal log. Instead, we learned to listen to it. The impossible wasn't made real through force or brilliance, but through humility and adaptation. The legacy of those crucial 4 days continued to unfold. Human and Viridian children now trained together aboard Luminara, learning to understand the universe in ways neither species had imagined possible. The station had become a beacon of hope, proving that the greatest achievements come not from conquering nature, but from learning to grow with it. As Luminara orbited Earth, its crystalline surface catching and transforming sunlight into patterns of incredible beauty, it stood as a testament to what could be achieved when different species chose to face the impossible together. The station was more than a home or a research center. It was a promise of what humanity and their new allies could become. In the end, the true legacy of Luminara wasn't just the technological advances or scientific breakthroughs. It was the profound understanding that the universe wasn't a hostile void to be conquered, but a living system waiting to be understood. The impossible had been made real not through power or control, but through trust, adaptation, and the courage to evolve together. As new crews arrived and others departed, Luminara continued its endless dance around Earth, a shining reminder that the greatest adventures in space would come not from imposing our will upon it, but from learning to grow with it, one impossible achievement at a time.